after 40, life stops being linear. The path you thought you were on, the one where you build, achieve, accumulate, and eventually coast into a comfortable future, that path disappears. What replaces it isn't failure, it's transition, one after another. Your body changes in ways you can't reverse. Your career plateaus or ends abruptly. Your relationships shift, sometimes breaking entirely. Your sense of who you are becomes unclear, like looking at yourself through fogged glass. And unlike the transitions of your youth, graduating, starting a career, getting married, these transitions don't come with instruction manuals or celebration. They come with loss, with uncertainty, with the uncomfortable realization that the life you built isn't the life you're living anymore. Most people try to fight these transitions. They resist the changes, cling to what was, and exhaust themselves trying to stay the same. But fighting transition doesn't stop it. It just makes it harder. Because there are stages to these transitions, 4 of them, that you must face whether you want to or not. You can't skip them, you can't rush them, and you can't avoid them, but you can understand them. And understanding them is what turns survival into transformation. Here's the paradox. You've already survived major transitions before. You've navigated career changes, relationship endings, relocations, losses. You know what it's like to have your life disrupted and to rebuild from scratch. So why do the transitions after 40 feel so much harder? Why does every change feel like a threat instead of an opportunity? Why does the idea of starting over, something you've done multiple times, now feel impossible? The answer lies in what these transitions are actually asking of you. The transitions of your youth were additive. You were becoming someone, building an identity, establishing yourself, adding skills, relationships, achievements. Even when those transitions were difficult, they moved you toward something, toward a clearer sense of self, toward a more defined future, toward the life you thought you were supposed to live. But the transitions after 40 are subtractive. They're about losing, not gaining. Losing the body you relied on. Losing the career that defined you. Losing relationships you thought were permanent. Losing the belief that you have unlimited time to figure things out. These transitions don't ask you to become someone. They ask you to let go of who you were. And that feels like dying. Not metaphorically, actually. Because identity is how we make sense of ourselves. And when the markers of that identity start disappearing, your role as a parent when your kids leave, your professional identity when you retire or get laid off, your partnership when a marriage ends, you're left asking the most terrifying question. Who am I without all of that? The cultural narrative doesn't help. Society tells you that life after 40 should be about stability. You've put in the work. You've earned your place. You should be settled by now, comfortable, secure. So when you find yourself in transition, uncertain, unmoored, starting over, it feels like failure, like you did something wrong, like you missed the window for a successful life, and now you're just scrambling to keep up. But the truth is, everyone faces these transitions. They're not signs of failure. They're developmental stages. William Bridges, the psychologist who studied life transitions, identified that every major change involves 3 phases: an ending, a neutral zone, and a new beginning. But what most people don't realize is that you can't skip the ending. You can't rush through the neutral zone to get to the beginning faster. Each stage has its own work. its own timeline, its own necessary discomfort. And this is where the real paradox lives. The very thing that makes you good at navigating life, your ability to plan, control, and execute, becomes a liability in transition. Because transitions can't be controlled. They can't be optimized. They unfold at their own pace, in their own way, regardless of how much you try to manage them. The skills that got you to 40, discipline, strategy, resilience, don't work the same way in the stages of transition. What works instead is something you've probably spent your whole life avoiding: surrender, not giving up, not becoming passive, but releasing the need to control outcomes you can't control. Accepting that some things must end before new things can begin. Sitting in the discomfort of not knowing who you're becoming while you let go of who you were. So you're caught in an impossible situation. You know intellectually that transition is normal, that everyone goes through it, that it's a necessary part of life after 40. But emotionally, it feels like failure. Like you're the only one who can't seem to get their life together. Like everyone else moved through these stages smoothly while you're stuck in the mess. And the longer you stay in that belief, the harder the transition becomes. Because you're not just dealing with the actual loss, the divorce, the layoff, the health crisis, the empty nest. You're also dealing with the shame of the loss, the embarrassment of being in transition when you're supposed to be settled, the fear that this discomfort is permanent, that you'll never feel like yourself again. And that shame and fear keep you from doing the one thing that would actually help, acknowledging where you are and allowing yourself to be there. Surviving life's transitions after 40 begins with understanding the 4 stages you must face. These aren't arbitrary categories. They're psychological and emotional territories that every major transition moves through. You can't skip them. You can't reorder them, but you can learn to recognize them, which changes everything. Because when you know where you are in the process, you stop mistaking a stage for a permanent state. You stop thinking that confusion means you're failing. You start trusting that what you're experiencing is exactly what's supposed to happen. And that trust is what allows you to move through the stages instead of getting stuck in them. The first stage is the ending. This is where everything begins, even though it feels like the opposite. Something in your life stops working. A relationship ends. A job disappears. Your health changes. Your children leave. Whatever it is, the life you knew is over. And the ending isn't just about the external event. It's about the internal identity attached to it. You're not just losing a marriage. You're losing the identity of being a spouse. You're not just losing a job. You're losing the sense of purpose and structure that job provided. The ending stage is disorienting because you're still physically in your life, but psychologically, you've already left it. You go through the motions, but nothing feels real. Nothing feels like it matters. This is when people say, I don't even recognize my own life anymore. And they're right, because the life they built is ending, and they haven't yet built the next one. Most people resist this stage. They try to prevent the ending from happening. They negotiate, bargain, cling to what's disappearing, or they rush through it, treating the ending as something to get over as quickly as possible. But endings can't be rushed. They have to be grieved. You have to acknowledge what you're losing, not just the external thing, the job, the relationship, the role, but the version of yourself that existed in that context, the the person who knew what to do every day, the person who had a clear identity, the person who felt secure, that person is gone, and pretending they're not, or trying to resurrect them, only prolongs the pain. The work of the ending stage is acceptance. Not acceptance as in you're happy about it, but acceptance as in you stop fighting reality. You let the ending be an ending. You allow yourself to mourn. You give yourself permission to feel lost because you are lost. And that's okay. That's the first stage. The second stage is what Bridges called the neutral zone, but it's better understood as the void. This is the space between who you were and who you're becoming. You've left the old life, but you haven't arrived at the new one yet. You're in limbo. And this stage is terrifying because there are no markers, no clear path forward, no sense of progress. You wake up every day not knowing who you are or what you're supposed to be doing. The roles that defined you are gone, but new roles haven't emerged. The routines that structured your days no longer exist, and you haven't built new ones. This is when people feel the most stuck, the most anxious, the most desperate to do something, anything, to make the discomfort stop. But the void isn't a problem to solve. It's a stage to inhabit. And the more you try to escape it, the longer you stay in it. The void is uncomfortable because it asks you to live without answers, without certainty, without a clear sense of direction. Everything in your conditioning screams at you to fix this, to make a plan, to take action. But the void doesn't reward action for action's sake. It rewards stillness. It rewards patience. It rewards the willingness to not know. Because the void is where transformation happens. Not through doing, but through being. When you stop trying to force the next chapter and start paying attention to what's emerging, that's when clarity begins to form. Not all at once, not in a dramatic revelation, but in small, quiet recognitions. A sense that you're drawn to something you weren't drawn to before. A realization that you don't miss certain aspects of your old life as much as you thought you would. A growing comfort with uncertainty itself. These aren't solutions, they're seeds, and they only grow in the emptiness of the void. The work of the void stage is to resist the urge to fill the space prematurely. To not jump into a new relationship just because being alone feels unbearable. To not take the first job offer just because unemployment feels shameful. To not reinvent yourself overnight because not having an identity feels like death. The void asks you to wait, to listen, to let the next version of yourself emerge organically instead of constructing it out of fear or desperation. And that requires a level of trust most people don't have. Trust that you won't be stuck here forever. Trust that something will emerge. Trust that not knowing is part of the process, not evidence that you're broken. The void is the hardest stage to endure, but it's also the most necessary, because you can't build a new life on top of an old identity. You have to let the old identity dissolve first, and that dissolution happens in the void. The third stage is experimentation. This is when you start trying things, not committing to things, not deciding who you're going to be for the rest of your life, just trying. You take a class in something that interests you. You reach out to someone you've been curious about. You change your routine slightly. You say yes to an invitation you would have declined before. None of these actions feel significant in the moment. They feel small, tentative, even silly. But experimentation is how you discover what fits, what resonates, what feels alive. After 40, you can't rely on the same methods you used to build your first life. You can't just follow the script. You have to write your own. And you don't write it by thinking. You write it by experimenting. This stage requires playfulness, which feels almost offensive when you're still grieving the ending and exhausted from the void. But playfulness doesn't mean you're not taking things seriously. It means you're not attaching your entire identity to every experiment. You're trying things to see what happens, not to prove something or fix yourself. You're giving yourself permission to fail, to change your mind, to discover that something you thought you wanted doesn't actually interest you. Experimentation is low-stakes exploration. It's the opposite of the pressure you've been putting on yourself to figure everything out immediately. And paradoxically, that lack of pressure is what allows insight to emerge. Because when you're not forcing yourself to have answers, you start noticing what actually calls to you. The work of the experimentation stage is to stay curious instead of becoming rigid, to avoid locking into a new identity too quickly just because it feels good to have an identity again, to keep trying different things, even when some of them don't work, to treat your life like a laboratory instead of a courtroom where every decision is a verdict on your worth. This stage is where people often make the mistake of rushing into a new version of their old life. They find a new job that looks like their old job. They start a new relationship that mirrors the patterns of the previous one. They adopt a new identity that's just a slight variation of the one they lost. And then they wonder why nothing feels different, why they're still unhappy, why the transition didn't actually transform them. It's because they skipped the experimentation. They went straight from the void to a conclusion, and conclusions reached out of desperation rarely lead to fulfillment. The fourth stage is integration. This is when the pieces start coming together. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough that you begin to recognize yourself again, not as the person you were before the transition, and not as someone entirely unrecognizable, but as a version of yourself that includes both the past and the present. You carry the wisdom of your earlier life without being defined by it. You honor what you've lost without letting it trap you. You embrace who you're becoming without pretending the transition was easy. Integration isn't about resolution. It's about coherence, about making sense of your story in a way that allows you to move forward without abandoning where you came from. This stage is quieter than the others. There's no dramatic moment where everything clicks into place. Instead, you notice small shifts. You wake up one day and realize you haven't thought about your old life in a while. You make a decision based on who you are now, not who you used to be. You feel at home in your own skin again, even though your skin has changed. Integration doesn't mean the pain is gone. It means the pain has been woven into the fabric of who you are. It's no longer a wound. It's a scar. And scars are proof that you survived. The work of the integration stage is to honor the entire journey, to not minimize the difficulty of the ending, to not dismiss the confusion of the void, to not trivialize the small experiments that led you here. Integration asks you to tell a new story about yourself, one that includes loss and growth, pain and resilience, endings and beginnings, one that acknowledges that transition didn't destroy you, it changed you. And change, even when it's unwanted, can lead to a life that's more honest, more aligned, more yours than the one you had before. When you stop fighting the stages and start moving through them intentionally, something fundamental shifts. You stop seeing transition as a crisis you need to escape and start recognizing it as a process you need to trust. The panic that kept you awake at night, the fear that you'll never feel normal again, that you've permanently lost yourself, begins to ease. Not because your circumstances have magically improved, but because you understand where you are. You know that confusion in the void doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're in the void. And the void, as uncomfortable as it is temporary. That knowledge alone changes how you carry the weight of transition. It stops feeling like evidence of failure and starts feeling like evidence that you're human. You also develop a different relationship with time. Before you understood the stages, every day in transition felt like wasted time. Time you should have been using to rebuild, to move on, to become the next version of yourself. But now you understand that each stage has its own timeline, that rushing through the ending doesn't get you to integration faster. It just keeps you stuck in unprocessed grief. That trying to skip the void doesn't make clarity arrive sooner. It just leads to decisions made out of panic instead of wisdom. When you trust the stages, you stop measuring your progress by external milestones and start recognizing the internal work that's happening. You see that sitting with uncertainty is progress, that allowing yourself to grieve is progress, that trying small experiments without needing them to lead anywhere is progress, and that shift in how you measure your own life is liberating. Your relationship with identity transforms. For most of your life, identity felt fixed. You were defined by your roles, your achievements, your relationships, and when those things disappeared, it felt like you disappeared with them. But moving through the stages teaches you that identity is fluid, that you're not one fixed thing, that losing a role doesn't erase you. It reveals a different dimension of who you are. You start to see yourself as someone capable of change. Someone who can hold multiple versions of themselves across time. Someone who doesn't need to cling to the past to have value in the present. And that flexibility, that willingness to let yourself evolve, becomes one of your greatest strengths. Because life after 40 demands evolution. And the people who suffer most are the ones who refuse to change. You also gain resilience that's different from what you had before. The resilience of your youth was about endurance, about pushing through, about proving you could handle anything. But the resilience you develop by moving through the stages is about adaptation, about surrendering control when control is impossible, about sitting with discomfort without needing to immediately fix it, about trusting yourself to navigate uncertainty even when you don't have a map. This kind of resilience isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet and steady. It's the ability to wake up in the void and not panic, to face an ending and not collapse, to experiment without needing guarantees. And that resilience serves you for the rest of your life, because transitions after 40 don't stop. They keep coming, and each time you'll recognize the stages. You'll know what to do. You'll trust yourself to survive it. Perhaps most importantly, you stop feeling alone in the process. When you understand that these stages are universal, that everyone navigating major life transitions moves through endings, voids, experimentation, and integration. You stop thinking there's something uniquely wrong with you. You stop comparing your messy middle to someone else's curated exterior. You start recognizing the signs of transition in other people's lives and feeling compassion instead of judgment. And when you encounter someone else in the void, you don't offer empty platitudes about everything happening for a reason. You offer presence. You say, "This is hard, and it's supposed to be hard, and you're not doing it wrong," because you know. You've been there. And that shared understanding, that recognition of the stages in yourself and others, creates connection in places where isolation used to live. Over time, you look back at the transition that once felt unbearable and realize it gave you something. Not in a silver lining, toxic positivity way, but in the simple recognition that you wouldn't be who you are now without having survived what you survived. The ending taught you what mattered. The void taught you patience. The experimentation taught you courage. The integration taught you that you're more than any single version of yourself. And while you wouldn't choose to go through it again, you also wouldn't trade who you've become for the comfort of who you were. Because surviving the stages doesn't just get you through a transition. It transforms you into someone capable of living fully, even when life refuses to stay still. Transition is not the enemy. It never was. The enemy is the belief that you should be past this by now, that you should have it figured out, that other people moved through their 40s smoothly while you're the only one stuck in the mess. But the truth is, no one moves through this smoothly. Everyone faces the stages. Everyone loses who they were and has to discover who they're becoming. Everyone sits in the void wondering if they'll ever feel like themselves again. The only difference between people who survive transition and people who get destroyed by it is this: the ones who survive stop fighting it. They stop trying to skip stages. They stop demanding certainty when uncertainty is the only honest answer. They let themselves grieve the ending. They sit in the void without filling it prematurely. They experiment without needing every experiment to work. They integrate slowly without forcing coherence before it's ready. You are in one of these stages right now. Maybe you're in the ending, mourning what's gone and terrified of what's next. Maybe you're in the void, feeling lost and desperate for direction. Maybe you're experimenting, trying things that feel small and insignificant, but are actually building the foundation of your next life. Or maybe you're integrating, finally making sense of a journey that once felt senseless. Wherever you are, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Not because everything happens for a reason, but because stages can't be skipped. They can only be survived. And you are surviving, one day at a time, one stage at a time, one breath at a time. That's all transition asks of you. Not that you do it perfectly, just that you keep going. And you are. You always have been. And that's enough.